So I guess the big question is, why were we getting a 404 when we went to the root of our application? Well, the reason for that is that Nancy is now inside of our pipeline and will hog any request that's coming through. There are a couple of ways to solve this. The first one is to use the map method on the IApp builder. This method allows us to define a specific path that will have its own configuration. So we could go ahead and map /Nancy to its own configuration and add Nancy to that. This would mean that anything that wasn't /Nancy would just skip this and go straight to the hello world. But let's just press F5 and you'll see that there's a little problem with this. So we get hello world, which we should now with this new configuration. But let's head over to /Nancy and see what happens there. Okay, so that's not really what we want. All of a sudden we're getting a 404 where we used to get a response. But let's try and add /Nancy to the end of our URL. Okay, so that seems to be working a lot better. But we're still getting a weird path. It says you requested /Nancy, but the actual path is /Nancy/Nancy. So why is this happening? Well, let's head back to Visual Studio and make a little change to our Nancy demo module. So as you can see here, we're routing out the OWIN.requestPath from our environment dictionary. But let's add in the OWIN.requestPathBase as well. Okay, so let's just press F5 and see what happens now. Let's just head straight over to /Nancy/Nancy to see what's happening. Well, now it's at least writing out the correct path, /Nancy/Nancy. So I guess the problem here is that Nancy seems to be doing its routing based on the request path, but ignoring the request path base. Luckily, there's a much better way to do this than to use the IApp builder's map method. The Nancy OWIN integration comes with this awesome setting where you can tell it to just pass through Nancy if the response codes are any of the predefined ones. But before I can set the options on my Nancy integration, I have to add another using statement for nancy.owin. But now that I've got that in place, I can head down to the use Nancy method and configure Nancy. However, Nancy has an optional way of doing the configuration that is different from the way I showed you in the previous module, and that's the one I'm going to use. So instead of passing in a Nancy options class to the method call, you pass in a delegate that accepts a configuration object. And then inside that delegate, you modify the configuration object, adding whatever configuration changes you want. In this case, I want to use the configuration options pass through when status codes are method to tell it that whenever the status code from Nancy is not found, it should just pass through to the next middleware. Like that. So let's just press F5 and see what happens. Well, we seem to be getting hello world back for that first request, so that seems to be working fine. And if we add the path /Nancy, we get a response back from our Nancy module, so that seems to be working fine as well. But what happens if we put in a path that's below Nancy? Well, that seems to be working as well. So in the current configuration, any request that goes into Nancy but returns a 404 not found will just pass through Nancy and end up at the next middleware in the pipeline. So with that configuration change done, our integration of Nancy into our pipeline is complete.